Today, we are diving deep into the mechanics behind the Koch family's multi-billion-dollar industrial empire and their profound influence on American politics. It's an absolutely fascinating story of industry, immense wealth, and systemic power.
So, picture this. When you turn on a light, drive your car, or grab a paper towel to clean up a spill, you're very likely interacting with a product tied to one of America's wealthiest families. Operating largely behind the scenes, the Kochs have built an empire that touches almost every single corner of the global economy.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll be looking at 1. The architects of empire, 2. Scaling a private behemoth, 3. Funding the political machine, 4. Climate, controversy, and impact, and finally, 5. A lasting American legacy.
All right, let's jump right into part 1, the architects of empire. The foundation of all this immense wealth actually goes way back to 1927. That's when Fred Koch invented a thermal cracking process to extract gasoline from crude oil. It was a massive breakthrough. But when Fred passed away in 1967, he left his $250 million company to his 4 sons. And as we see so often, immense wealth brought immense division. This sparked a really bitter power struggle throughout the 70s and 80s, pitting brothers Charles and David against their siblings Bill and Frederick.
This brings us to a major turning point. After years of intense lawsuits and family tension, Charles and David finally bought out their brothers in 1983. The price tag? Well, it was over a staggering $1 billion. But that buyout granted them full, unchallenged control to chart a brand new, highly aggressive course for the company.
Which leads us perfectly into part 2, scaling a private behemoth. Once they had the reins, they absolutely did not just stick to oil. They went on a massive diversification spree. We're talking vast networks of pipelines across the Midwest, chemical plants, and commodities trading firms. A prime example of this was the enormous $21 billion acquisition of Georgia Pacific back in 2005. That single purchase is actually what brought household names like Dixie cups and Brawny paper towels right under the Koch umbrella, literally into our kitchen cabinets.
Now, what's really fascinating here is the structure of the business itself. Unlike publicly traded corporations that are constantly sweating over quarterly earnings reports and Wall Street expectations, Koch Industries is privately held. This shielded structure meant Charles could take a highly disciplined, long-term approach to growth. He didn't have to answer to impatient outside shareholders every 3 months.
And because of that unique private structure, they could do something most public companies simply can't afford to do. They reinvested up to 90% of their profits directly back into the business. Just 10% was retained or distributed. This relentless, compounding reinvestment engine is exactly what helped them generate well over $100 billion in annual revenue today, securing their spot as one of the largest privately held companies in the entire world.
So, what do you do with all that capital? Let's get into part 3, funding the political machine.
You see, Charles and David weren't just businessmen. They were deeply ideological. They were driven by a strict libertarian philosophy, meaning they strongly believed in free markets, minimal government intervention, lower taxes, and the dismantling of corporate regulations. And this wasn't just some casual side interest for them. David Koch actually ran as the Libertarian Party's vice presidential candidate back in 1980. After that 1980 run, they realized they could wield way more influence by working outside the official party structures. So, to turn their philosophy into reality, they built a formidable political machine. Step 1. They hosted biannual donor summits, basically corralling billions of dollars from other wealthy conservatives. Step 2. They funneled money into academic think tanks, establishing or supporting groups like the Cato Institute and the Heritage Foundation to actually shape policy ideas. And Step 3. Grassroots mobilization. They backed powerhouse organizations like Americans for Prosperity, mobilizing millions of everyday voters to push for conservative policies and fight things like universal health care.
Of course, that kind of influence does not go unnoticed. Moving to part 4, climate, controversy, and impact.
When you build a machine that can rival major political parties, you're going to draw incredible scrutiny. Critics were very quick to point out what they saw as a blatant conflict of interest. Because Koch Industries relies so heavily on fossil fuels and chemicals, the family's political advocacy directly benefited their own bottom line. They spent hundreds of millions fighting environmental regulations and climate change legislation. They also funded organizations that cast doubt on climate science, arguing that strict environmental policies would just stifle economic growth.
This financial pipeline really brings us to the concept of dark money.
That's a term critics use to describe billionaires leveraging vast wealth to fund political advocacy without any real transparency. The argument there is that it effectively drowns out the voices of everyday citizens in the democratic process.
So the Koch legacy is, to put it mildly, deeply polarized. On one hand, detractors see them as the ultimate symbol of dark money, using billions to protect corporate interests at the public's expense. But on the other hand, supporters look at the exact same actions and see true champions of liberty. They see unmatched engines for job creation who fiercely defended the American dream against government overreach.
Let's bring this to the present day in Part 5, a lasting American legacy.
Though David Koch passed away in 2019, Charles continues to steer the ship. The network is constantly evolving, sometimes rebranding its initiatives, but it remains a highly potent force in public life. Regardless of where you stand politically, their story is absolutely one of unparalleled business acumen and fierce ideological determination. It's a legacy deeply woven right into the modern fabric of the United States.
So I want to leave you with this provocative thought. When you look at the sheer scale of this empire, from the paper towels sitting in your kitchen to the think tanks shaping laws in Washington, how does privately held wealth ultimately shape the public policies that govern your everyday life? That's definitely something to think about the next time you cast a ballot or even just fill up your gas tank. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring the forces that shape our world.